Thank you. I'd like to set the mood for bike stuff. All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for staying for the last presentation. My name is Eric Harrison. I'm going to be presenting to you tonight a project I've entitled Understanding Bicycle Safety in Tucson, Arizona, Perception and Reality. Quick roadmap. First, we'll have an introduction, and I will discuss with you the impetus for this project and its origins here in Tucson. Then we're going to go through some of the data that I used, the analyses I performed on that data. Lastly, some conclusions and acknowledgments. I hope some of you recognize this mural. Tucson is home to a really wonderful, vibrant and thriving bike culture. We have a lot of commuters, a lot of great races. This is down, I think, on like 6th and Euclid. And we've got, desert tortoises and javelinas on mountain bikes, and a senorita and a cowboy riding their road bikes. Some of you might recognize this as well. This is the Tour de Tucson, one of our most famous races put on by Perimeter Cycling. I had the privilege of riding in this in 2017. It's my first century. This is Cyclovia, which we actually just had recently, where they shut down a section of the town so that families and anyone who wants to can enjoy it on their bikes and interact with different vendors and businesses. And another one of my personal favorites is 24 Hours in Old Pueblo. It's held north of Tucson. It's been described as the Burning Man of mountain bike races. It's kind of crazy. However, unfortunately, as I'm sure many of you know, accidents still happen. In fact, there's actually kind of a lot considering our city's bicycle safety rating. And in the worst cases, they're fatal. I'm sure if you go around Tucson, you've probably noticed ghost bikes, these memorialized people who passed away having been hit. And as a rider, these are really prolific to me. I see them everywhere. And in fact, like bike accidents touched my life and my partner's. This is her about 1.5, 2 weeks after she was hit, coloring with our beloved friend Mohammed, who's here. Thankfully, she's doing great. This was a picture of some of her first steps after the accident. You can see her mischievous grin here. She told me it was bad news from the doctors that day, and that was a patent lie. She's still bemused. And yeah, so she's back on her bike, and that's wonderful. We were really lucky and blessed. But as we went through the healing process, there were so many conversations where people were like, oh, it's so dangerous in Tucson. It's so dangerous. It's the drivers. They don't look. And it's the cyclists. They don't look. And the road conditions are terrible. And I couldn't help but begin to wonder if I could apply my new GIS skills and if some of the anecdotal evidence and thoughts that people shared about bicycle safety were accurate. So I decided to look at it with two questions in mind. Relative to bicycle safety usage, which intersections in Tucson are going to be the most dangerous? And secondly, how do cyclists think about bicycle safety, and is it accurate? So now let's talk about the data. I had 3 primary data sets. The first one was a usage data set from the Pima Association of Governments. The second was a bicycle collision data set put together by TPD and made open to the public online. And the last was a bike safety survey that I conducted. Here's the study area. I'm sure you all know it. We've got Tucson down there. So this is an image of the PAG data before I began working with it. Each one of these points represents a survey site for an intersection. These surveys are conducted in October annually, and they count how many bicyclists pass through the intersection, whether they're male or female, if they're riding the wrong way, if they're wearing helmets. For my purposes, I just looked at totals. And this is the TPD data for collisions. Both these data sets were from 2013 to 2018. And you can already see there's some patterning along major roads and certainly around the University of Arizona. So we decided to do a subset of Tucson. We thought doing the whole thing might be a little too big, especially for people to report on easily. So this heat map represents the PAG usage data. And this is downtown Tucson, University of Arizona. This is the highest area of usage. So we centered the study site for my bike survey around that area. And you can see It goes just a bit south, a few hundred meters south of Broadway here, a few hundred meters north of Grant Road, Alvernon to the east, and the western bounding is approximately A Mountain. This is the survey map that I have you. Most people in this room have probably filled this out, truth be told. So I asked people to draw on this map and answer a few basic demographic questions. Gender, age, approximately how many miles per week they bike, and what sort of biking they think of like theirs as being, primarily recreational, commuting, or a little bit of both. So some of the answers. So for the type of riding, it was overwhelmingly recreational, just about 50%. And then only 14% said that they used it for commuting only, and then another 30% said that they used their biking for both purposes. We were just over 50% male and 35% female, with about 11% of people giving no answer. I also had a non-binary option that actually no one selected. In terms of distance, I was pretty surprised that so many people rode so little. I thought we'd have more long-distance riders. So 40% of folks only rode between 0 and 10 miles a week. And then we were about even, 12 and 14% for the 10 to 15 and 15 to 20 miles. And then another 30% rode 25% or more. I think upon reflection, that's actually pretty representative of Tucson. Either you're kind of a casual rider, or maybe you really love riding and you ride a lot. And then in terms of age, this one surprised me a lot, and I was accused of being ageist by a lot of people who I surveyed, because a lot of them are well over 35, and about 50% of my respondents fell into that category of 35 plus. I thought I'd have more college-age students, but I ended up with only about 13% of respondents falling into that category, and then 25 to 35 were about even, with 17 and 16% respectively. So I digitized all of their answers. This was a really time-consuming but pretty fun process, and it was a really interesting look into how people think. And you can see, without running any analyses on these, there is already some patterning showing up. So some people didn't write down points. I gave people a lot of liberty in terms of how they chose to respond. And so some folks actually just drew lines, and I chose to make those their own feature class. And this is a map of them. What this map doesn't show, but we will shortly, is that some of these lines are repeated many times over. So I think there are some roads in particular that people think of as a whole as being dangerous. These are all the routes that people indicated where they like to ride. So you can see it's pretty complex. Some people were extremely detail-oriented. Other people just drew like big circles sometimes. Some surveys weren't actually terribly usable. So now let's talk about the analyses that I performed on that data. All right, so first, right back to the routes that you saw. This is a heat map representing, or it's a line density map, very similar to a heat map, representing where people indicated routes the most. You can see University Boulevard here in third. This other northern extension is Mountain, which is a major bike boulevard. You can see people kind of like to use their bikes to get down into downtown Tucson. And then I think this area here is popular because it's connected to this, this main highly popular bike area, and it'll get you onto the loop, which, if you don't already know, is a really safe way to circumnavigate the town without having to interact with any cars, except maybe one or two tiny exceptions. So dangerous roads, I think most of you could probably guess what this is. That is Speedway and Grant. And then a lot of people said Campbell. Okay, so dangerous points. Actually, I love this because it did become really clear. A lot of folks think of downtown Tucson as being dangerous. Roads along Campbell, we've got Campbell and I think this is Broadway, Speedway, Grant, and then Grant and Oracle in the Grant and First area. And the trends visible in this data only became more clear when I stacked the roads with the points, and those same hot spots only became more illuminated. So some basic descriptives for the data. Bike collisions by day of the week. It's relatively even throughout Wednesday and Thursday. Monday and Friday both fall in the 170s, and these are a number of accidents between 2013 and 2018. The weekend is the lowest. I think anecdotally this makes a lot of sense. More interestingly to me, this is accidents by time of day. So these are hours. This is a 24-hour time period. And you can see accidents are the lowest in the middle of the night when everybody's sleeping. There's a peak during commuting hours, and then a much more significant peak during rush hour. Okay, so this is a heat map of the collisions. Without any kind of normalization, you can see that there's hot points around Alvernon, the University of Arizona, and on Speedway, and then a few more up in that Oracle and First area. So an issue with trying to normalize the collisions by usage is they were both point data sets. Neither of them were continuous. So I needed to structure them in a way that would allow them to interact neatly. So this is the PAG data set, the usage visualized by both size and color. And I used a kriging function to interpolate a surface between all of the points. So this developed a model and put a value in each one of these colors associated with the number of bicyclists that pass through that area. You can see the hotspot still centered over the University of Arizona. Some really cool spots in the rural areas to the south and southeast. I think there's a lot of north-south travel throughout the city between the Catalina foothills, River Road, and Campbell area. And these are the collision data set put through a kernel density function, which took all of the nearest neighbors in each raster cell for accidents, and then summarized them into one little point. And you can already see some hotspots beginning to appear along Grant and along Speedway. So I divided the values in the collision kernel density by the kriging values, and I got this map. So in green, the darker green, the safer it is. That also represents a paucity of data. And then if it's hotter, that means that there were more collisions for that degree of usage. So cleaning it up a little bit, you can see there's a lot of green right around the University of Arizona, and that's actually a really good sign. I found it kind of disheartening at first. I was like, oh no, because that was where my study was centered around. I was hoping there'd be something more interesting. But really what this indicates is that the underpasses and bicycle crossings that they've installed around the University of Arizona are doing their job and making it more safe, relatively speaking. But the hotspots, as you can see, there's a few of them that really stand out. One far to the south, a number in the east, and then up to the north where we already saw those hotspots in the heat map. So this was the survey of dangerous areas, talking about what people thought. And you can see it represented a pretty significant subsection of where these actual dangerous areas might be. And so if I had this study to do over again, I think I would definitely want to expand it to be more of Tucson. But I think for our little area, it is still useful and interesting. So the conclusions that I've drawn, first answering those two questions, what are the most dangerous intersections relative to bicycle usage? Speedway and Alvernon, Speedway and Swan, South 6th Avenue and the Benson Highway, that was that little red point far to the south, and Oracle and Fort Lowell, that was that point up north. And how do cyclists think about safety, and is it accurate? Our perception does reflect the basic collision heat map. It doesn't really reflect the normalized one. That's also in part because of the limited scope of this study. One thing that I learned about perception is that it's very, very highly variable. A lot of people thought about interactions with cars, but some people that I asked, they'd be like, oh man, this is where you would get mugged and your bike might get stolen. And a lot of older gentlemen who I talked to would be like, oh, there's so many potholes here. This is where the road is terrible. Like, you're bound to crash. So I think it really depends on your experience and how you think about it. So for city planners, I think this could be really useful because these sorts of analyses could help influence and inform decisions about where to build new bicycle infrastructure, what factors are driving bicycle collisions, and how effective our past efforts have been. The city of Tucson has this really great map that I didn't get any data from yet that has all of the bikeways, and I think the density of bikeways around the University of Arizona is really reflected, but I'd love to see what that map would look like in combination with my data. For bike organizations like the Living Streets Alliance and GABA and Perimeter Cycling, all of whom I worked with, I think this could help inform what they might want to advocate for and who with. I know they work relatively closely with the city of Tucson. So I think another good one would be driver curriculum, augmenting what it takes to get a license with a little more awareness of bicyclists. And for cyclists, one of my largest takeaways was that I would like to stay on the less populated streets. If you go through those side streets areas where there are fewer cars, I think it's just a little bit safer, and do everything I can to avoid evening rush hour. You know, offset your work day, grab a cup of coffee, just do something not to be riding during that time. My acknowledgments, these are a lot of the groups that I worked with, from El Grupo, Roadrunner Cycles, Transit, Chris, Andrew, the entire GS cohort. Gary, you taught me cumulative opinion services. I worked with some of Peter's associates from the city. Kim for supporting me and helping inspire this, all of my friends. I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate almost everyone in this room who I know personally. Just a few strangers, future friends. Questions, comments, concerns?